All right, let's go on a journey. I want you to picture the Egyptian desert in the 3rd and 4th centuries. And I don't mean tourist-friendly pyramids. I mean a vast, sun-scorched, absolutely unforgiving wilderness. It's right here, in this incredible emptiness, that a radical spiritual movement was born. One that would, no joke, change the entire course of Christianity.
And that brings us to the central mystery of our story today. For almost 300 years, being a Christian could get you killed. Then, all of a sudden, it was safe. It was even becoming fashionable. So why at that exact moment of victory, did thousands of the most passionate believers run away from it all? That's what we're going to figure out.
To get why they left, we first have to understand the world they came from. And for the early church, that world was really defined by one thing: persecution. This was the age of martyrs.
For generations, being a Christian meant you were living under a constant threat, especially under emperors like Diocletian. The suffering was so intense, so brutal, that the native Egyptian church, that's the Coptic church, still calls this time the era of the martyrs, even today.
In that kind of environment, the ultimate act of faith, the highest possible calling, was martyrdom. The word itself literally means witnessing, and these men and women witness with their blood. They were the spiritual superheroes of the early church, the absolute gold standard for total commitment to Christ.
And then, almost overnight, everything changed. The danger was gone. But that created a totally new, completely unexpected spiritual crisis for the most devout Christians.
The magic number is 313 AD. That's the year Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan. And just like that, Christianity was legal. The religion that had been an outlawed sect was now on the fast track to becoming the official religion of the empire. But this new safety created a new problem. How do you prove you're all in when your faith costs you nothing?
With the path of what they called red martyrdom, literally dying for Christ, now closed, a new ideal started to take shape: white martyrdom. The goal wasn't to die for Christ once in a bloody arena, but to die to the world, die to yourself every single day. It was a new kind of heroism, a quieter one, fought not in public but in the solitude of your own heart.
And the first person to truly become the poster child for this new path to answer this crisis of comfort was a young man from a wealthy Egyptian family. His name was Anthony.
Now for Anthony, these were not just words on a scroll. He walked into church one day, he heard this verse from the Gospel of Matthew, and he took it as a direct, personal command from God. And his response? It was immediate and absolute.
And when I say absolute, I mean it. He sold his family's big estate, gave all the money to the poor, then he began this gradual retreat from society, moving deeper and deeper and deeper into the desert, systematically stripping away every single worldly distraction in his search for God.
You know, the funny thing is, Anthony wanted to be alone, but his holiness was like a magnet. His story was written down by the great bishop Athanasius, and the book, The Life of St. Anthony, became a spiritual blockbuster. Seriously, it was translated, copied, passed all around the Roman Empire, and it inspired thousands of people to follow his example right into the wilderness.
So Anthony's example was incredibly powerful, but that intense, solitary path, well, that wasn't for everyone. As the movement exploded in popularity, two main ways of living this new life in the desert started to form.
So, first you have the eremitic life. It comes from the Greek word for desert, eremos. This is Anthony's way, the way of the hermit. The battlefield wasn't the Colosseum anymore. It was the landscape of your own soul, a one-on-one struggle against your inner demons.
But then you've got the cenobitic life, which comes from the Greek for common life. A former Roman soldier named Pachomius figured out that, well, a lot of people need structure, they need community. So he organized monks into the very first monasteries, where they all lived, worked, and prayed together under a shared rule.
And this communal model was a wild success. It turned out there was a huge demand for this way of life. By creating these organized communities, Pachomius built a framework that allowed thousands of ordinary men and women, not just the most hardcore individuals, to follow this radical calling.
Okay, so what came out of all this? What did these thousands of people actually discover out there in the silence? Well, they left behind an absolute treasure trove of spiritual wisdom.
And it wasn't just one type of person, which is what's so cool about it. You had these brilliant intellectuals like Evagrius Ponticus. You had incredibly wise women they called Amma, or Mother, like Syncletica. And you even had reformed criminals like Abba Moses the Black, Former slaves, rich aristocrats, all of them were drawn to the exact same radical life. And the wisdom they shared was just so real, no sugarcoating. Listen to this from Amma Sinclatica. She says, it starts with a struggle. It's a fight. It's hard. But on the other side of that struggle is a joy you literally cannot describe.
Their teachings were usually passed down person to person. A young disciple would come to an elder and say, Abba, or Father, give me a word. And that short, powerful response would become their focus. Eventually, these were collected into books called the Sayings of the Fathers. They weren't just collecting nice quotes, they were gathering weapons for that inner war, a war against what they called logismi, the obsessive, distracting thoughts that pull us away from what's real.
This idea, this whole new way of being totally committed, it was just explosive. It started with one man hearing one verse in one village church. And from there, it spread like wildfire, from the sands of Egypt to Palestine, to Syria, and eventually all the way to Western Europe.
And if you want to understand the shockwave this movement sent through the world, just look at St. Augustine. We're talking about one of the greatest minds in history. And when he heard the story of Anthony, this was his reaction. He was completely humbled, totally inspired that these so-called unlearned monks had a courage that he, with all his learning, felt he lacked. Hearing their story was a major turning point in his own life.
So we come full circle. They fled a world that had become too comfortable for the harsh reality of the desert, all to find something real. And that leaves us with a final question to think about. In our own age, an age defined not by comfort, but by constant, endless distraction, what is our desert? Where is the place we need to go to find what truly matters?